I always thought I knew my son. I raised him alone since his father died 10 years ago. I know how he breathes when he lies, how he fidgets when he is nervous, and even how he lowers his gaze when he wants to hide something from me. But that day, while I was washing his jacket, I understood that there are things a mother never fully finishes knowing. It was 5 in the afternoon. The sun was filtering through the kitchen window, and the water in the sink ran warm. David's jacket, soaking wet, weighed more than usual. I put my hand in the pocket, and between some coins and a bus transfer, I felt something damp and crumpled. I pulled it out without thinking. It was a piece of paper folded several times, with the ink runny. I opened it carefully, and the words made me tremble. When she finds out, do what we agreed on. I froze. My heart was pounding in my chest. The paper was stained, as if it had been touched with dirty or wet hands. She? I read it again. Who was he referring to? And what was this about what we agreed on? For a moment, I wanted to convince myself that it was nonsense, a joke, an unimportant paper, something lost. But the crooked letters, written in a hurry, told me otherwise. There was fear in that handwriting. There was urgency. I took a deep breath and looked at the jacket again. Something in me didn't want to do it, but curiosity or a gut feeling was stronger. I turned it inside out, and in the lining, sewn clumsily, there was a small lump. I cut the thread with a pair of scissors, and when I opened the fabric, an object fell to the floor with a metallic sound. I bent down slowly. It was a key, old and rusty, with a number engraved on it, 17B. I held it between my fingers and felt a chill. I didn't know why, but something told me I shouldn't have found it. I sat in silence, staring at the key on the table. The paper remained beside me, flattened out, like a silent warning. I tried to remember the last time David had worn that jacket. It was the night before. He had arrived late, after telling me he was at work. I noticed he was nervous, distracted, as if his mind were somewhere else. "Everything is fine, Mom," he told me. But his smile, that smile wasn't one of peace. It was of fear. I picked up the paper again. The message burned my hands. When she finds out. She? Was he referring to me? To another woman? To whom did he have to do something when she found out? The thought tightened my chest. For years I had believed that David was the only pure thing I had left of the man I loved. But in that moment, for the first time, I doubted it. I tried to distract myself. I went to the patio, hung up the clothes, listened to the neighbors talking, the barking of a dog in the distance, but I couldn't stop thinking about the key and the note. It was as if both had a life of their own, a secret watching me from the table. I wondered if I should confront him, ask him directly, but I imagined him looking at me with that mixture of guilt and fury he had had lately, and I didn't dare. A mother always feels when her son no longer belongs to her entirely, when something or someone is pulling him away. And David hadn't been fully here for months. When night fell, I sat on the sofa with the paper between my fingers. The silence of the house was heavy. Only the ticking of the clock filled the air. The key was still on the table, shining faintly under the lamp. I didn't know whether to keep it or throw it away, but something told me I should keep it, that sooner or later I was going to need it. And just when fear was starting to take over me, I heard the noise of the door. David had arrived. "Hi, Mom," he said, leaving his keys on the table. "Hi, son," I replied, trying to sound natural. "How was your day?" "Good." "Tired?" "A lot of work." His voice sounded normal, but his eyes didn't. He avoided looking at me. His movements were clumsy, nervous. I watched him as he went up to his room. When he passed by me, the smell of metal, of smoke, hit my nostrils. A strange smell, foreign to him. I remained alone in the living room, staring at the stairs. Inside me, something was breaking. My instinct was screaming at me that something terrible was happening. I didn't know what, but I sensed it with the cold certainty mothers have when something threatens their children. I looked at the damp jacket hanging by the window, the paper on the table, the key between my fingers, and I made myself a promise. I was going to discover the truth, even if it hurt me, even if that truth destroyed me. But before continuing, I want to extend a very special invitation to you. Subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This helps me see that you support me and enjoy my stories, and comment down below which city you are watching us from. Now, let's continue. That night, I didn't sleep. Every noise in the house startled me. At midnight, I heard David moving in his room, opening a drawer, and then the sound of the window closing softly. I got up without making a noise. I went to his door and pressed my ear against it. Nothing, just silence. I went back to my room, sat on the bed, and turned on the lamp. The paper was still in my hand. I read it one more time. When she finds out, do what we agreed on. I didn't know what it meant, but I had the feeling that those words were a countdown, as if something were about to explode. I squeezed the paper tightly, closed my eyes, and prayed in silence. Not for me, for him, for my son, because something told me I was about to lose him, and that what I had found was only the beginning. Since that afternoon, the house didn't seem the same to me. The clock marked the same hours. The wind kept hitting the windows in the same way, but something invisible had changed. It was as if the air had weight, as if the walls breathed with caution. Sometimes I caught myself listening to my own footsteps, waiting to hear others behind me. David, on the other hand, seemed to notice nothing, or pretended not to. He left early, came back late, and avoided any conversation that lasted more than a minute. When I served him dinner, he ate in silence, looking at his plate as if he were thinking about something else. I watched him out of the corner of my eye, looking for signs, looking for the son I once knew, and who was no longer there. One night, while I was clearing the table, I saw his phone lit up on the counter. A notification illuminated the screen. See you tomorrow. Don't mess this up. L. The letter. L. Nothing else. The message disappeared seconds later. I stood still with my heart clenched. I didn't want to touch the phone, but doubt was eating me alive. Who was L? And what was this thing he shouldn't mess up? That night, I didn't sleep. During the following days, I watched him more closely. He groomed himself more than usual, checked his watch every moment, and every time the phone rang, he left the room to answer. One afternoon, I heard his voice in the hallway, whispering in an urgent tone. Yes. No. She can't know. I told you I would handle it. The rest of the sentence was lost when I got closer. The sound of his footsteps going up the stairs left me nailed to the floor. I tried to convince myself that I was exaggerating, that I shouldn't imagine things. But fear has a curious way of settling in. It enters through the mind and ends up hiding in the heart. On Friday, while David was at work, I entered his room. I hadn't done that since he was a child. The room smelled of cologne, of metal, of something I couldn't identify. His desk was tidy, too tidy, and the bed immaculate. I opened the top drawer and found a small notebook with a black cover. I opened it carefully. There were only numbers, dates, and a word written over and over again. Delivery. I understood then that the paper and the key were not simple coincidences. There was something else, something he wasn't telling me. That same day, while I was cleaning the living room, I saw that he had forgotten his jacket on the back of a chair. My heart skipped a beat. For a moment, I hesitated if I should do it, but curiosity won out. I checked the pockets. I found a parking ticket with an address. Oak Street, 17B. The same number engraved on the key I found. I felt a chill run through my body. I kept the ticket and the key in a metal box that I hid under my bed. From that moment on, I decided not only to watch him, but to follow him. On Saturday, I pretended I was going to the market. I saw him leave the house with the same gray jacket and a briefcase in his hand. I waited a few minutes and took the same bus as him. He got off near downtown, walked fast, and turned down a side street. I kept my distance, hiding among the people. Finally, he entered an old building, with walls stained by dampness and a metal door with no sign. On the doorframe, barely visible, was engraved the number 17B. My heart was beating hard. I approached slowly, not daring to enter. I waited several minutes. Then I saw him. David came out accompanied by a woman. She was young, with dark hair and a red coat. They were laughing. He looked at her with tenderness, with a closeness he hadn't shown me in months. I don't know if it was pain or relief I felt. Maybe both. For a moment, I thought it all came down to that. An affair, an emotional betrayal, something human after all. But then, when they said goodbye, she handed him a white envelope. He put it quickly into his briefcase and looked side to side, nervous. And in that gesture, I knew it wasn't love. It was fear. I returned home before him. I turned on the TV to pretend, although I wasn't listening to anything. When he arrived, I tried to behave as always. "How was work, son?" I asked. "Good. Same as always. You look tired?" "A lot," he said, avoiding my eyes. "I'm going to sleep early." He went up the stairs, and seconds later, I heard the lock of his door. I remained seated, motionless, with my hands trembling. He was lying to me. And the worst wasn't the lie, but the reason behind it. The next morning, the envelope appeared. I found it on the dining room table, open. Inside, there were papers, receipts, and a blurry photograph. A man in front of a ruined building. In the corner of the paper, in red ink, a word was written. Proof. The image had a date. March 12th, the day my husband died. My heart skipped a beat so strong that I had to lean against the wall so as not to fall. Was it a coincidence? Or did David know something about his father's death that I never knew? I spent the rest of the day in silence. When David came down for dinner, I watched him with a strange calm. Every feature of his, the way he held his fork, his tired gaze, his voice, seemed like an enigma to me. I no longer saw my son. I saw a stranger hiding something dark in the shadows of his gestures. Before going to sleep, he kissed me on the forehead, as he always did. But instead of calming me, that gesture froze my blood. Because his kiss wasn't one of love. It was of farewell. That night, I didn't sleep. Sitting in the dark, with the photograph on my lap and the key in my hand, I knew my life had changed forever, and that what I was about to discover could destroy us both. I don't remember ever feeling so much anxiety in my life. Since I found that photograph and the envelope with the word proof, something inside me changed. It was as if the ground beneath my feet had ceased to be firm. I no longer slept more than a couple of hours a night. I ate without hunger. I lived in silence, trying not to show the tremor that ran through my hands. David acted with the same forced normality as always, but I knew something wasn't right. His gaze had become darker, tenser. Sometimes I saw him check his phone and then delete messages quickly. Other times, he simply stood still in front of the window, with his eyes lost, as if he were deciding something very grave. One Tuesday afternoon, when he said he was going to work overtime, I followed him again. I didn't care anymore if he discovered me. I needed to know the truth, even if it hurt. I took a taxi at a certain distance and saw him stop in front of the same building on Oak Street, the one with number 17B. This time he wasn't alone. The woman in the red coat was waiting for him on the corner, talking on the phone. I hid behind a car and watched them. She handed him something, a large envelope, while he looked around nervously. Then they walked together into the building. I waited a few minutes, but anxiety was eating me alive. I got closer. The door to the place was ajar, and murmurs filtered out from inside. I leaned in a little and listened. "It has to be this week," said a man's voice, unknown to me. "She is starting to suspect," David replied. My heart stopped. "Suspect?" repeated the woman in the red coat. "Suspect what?" "Everything," he said in a low tone. "If she discovers something ahead of time, she will ruin everything." The air left my body. I had to lean against the wall so as not to fall. They were talking about me. About me. I kept listening, holding my breath. "And are you sure she kept the papers?" asked the woman. "Yes," David replied. "She always has them close, but she doesn't know what they mean." "Then there is no problem," said the man. "Just make sure she doesn't find the box." Box. What box were they referring to? For an instant, I thought about the one I had hidden under my bed, the one that contained the key and the paper. Did they know? Fear paralyzed me. The floor seemed to move beneath my feet. I backed away carefully, trying not to make noise, but I tripped on a stone, and the metal door moved just a few inches. The screech was enough. I heard a sudden silence inside, followed by footsteps. I ran away, turning the corner without looking back. I didn't stop until I reached the bus stop. I got on with my heart racing, hands sweaty, and my soul tangled in questions. What were they doing? What papers were they talking about? And why did my son, my own son, have to ensure I didn't discover something? The trip back was a blur. I only remember David's face in my mind, repeating those words. If she discovers something ahead of time, she will ruin everything. That night, I didn't turn on any lights. I sat in the darkness of the dining room, with the key in one hand and the paper in the other. The two objects seemed to connect, as if they held the answer that was consuming me. But I didn't dare to look for it. The fear of the truth can be more devastating than the lie. When David arrived, I pretended to be asleep. I heard his steps entering the house, the sound of the shower, the opening and closing of drawers. Then silence. But just before he turned off the light in his room, I heard something. The metallic sound of a lock turning. And it wasn't his door. It was the hallway closet. I waited a few minutes, then I went out on tiptoe. The hallway was dark. The closet, the old wooden closet where I kept the blankets, had a lock we hadn't used for years. I touched the handle. It was cold. At dawn, when he left, I looked for the old keys to the house. After trying several, I managed to open the closet. Inside, wrapped in a gray blanket, was a metal box. On top, a label. Dad's papers. My hands were shaking so much I almost dropped it. I opened it carefully. Inside were old documents, newspaper clippings, letters with a company letterhead, and a photograph, the same one I found in the envelope, only this time clear. The man in the photo was my husband, but he wasn't alone. Beside him, standing with an icy smile, was Roger, his brother, Uncle Roger. And behind, in the shadows, barely visible, my son David. I felt the world stop. It was impossible. The date at the bottom of the photograph was from the same day as the accident that cost my husband his life. The same day David told me he had been at college. The same day, Uncle Roger swore everything had been an unavoidable tragedy. A buzzing filled my ears. My breathing became short, heavy. Was it possible that my son knew something about his father's death? Or worse yet, that he was involved? I sat on the floor without strength. The open box in front of me looked like a grave. I took out one of the letters. It had Roger's signature and the word transfer in the header. There was money, business, lies, and in the middle of all that, David's name, written in blue ink. When I heard the noise of his car returning that afternoon, I put everything away quickly. I put the box under my bed and ran to the kitchen. When he entered, I greeted him with a forced smile. "Hi, son," I said, feigning normality. "I made your favorite dish." "Thanks, Mom," he replied, kissing me on the forehead. His gesture was sweet, too sweet. During dinner, I watched him in silence. His hands trembled slightly, as if they were carrying something he didn't want to let go of, and for the first time in my life, I felt afraid of my own son. That night, before sleeping, I opened my notebook and wrote a single sentence. "A mother's love can endure everything, except doubt." And when I turned off the light, I knew there was no turning back. I was going to discover the truth, even if it hurt me, even if that truth forced me to look at my son like a stranger. I had never felt fear in that way. It wasn't a fear that screamed. It was a fear that breathed slowly, that slid along the walls and sat beside me while I ate. Every night I felt it there, invisible, watching me. And it had my son's face. David had become a stranger. He no longer hugged me, no longer smiled. When I spoke to him, he answered with short sentences, as if every word weighed on him, and although I tried to behave naturally, every second with him became a challenge. We lived in the same house, but between us, there was a wall made of secrets. One early morning, I woke up startled. I don't know why, but I felt I had to get up. The house was silent, but from the hallway came a dull, repetitive sound. I approached slowly, holding my breath. The door to David's room was ajar, and a beam of dim light filtered through the crack. I heard him moving something heavy, as if dragging a box. I stood still, paralyzed. He was speaking in a low voice, as if murmuring to himself. I only managed to catch one phrase. "It has to disappear. Everything, before she finds it." My heart skipped a beat. I backed away without making noise and returned to my room. I sat on the bed, my hands freezing cold. That phrase haunted me all night, repeating itself over and over. Before she finds it. What was he talking about? What was he referring to? And who had to disappear? At dawn, David was already gone. His bed was empty, but under the mattress, I noticed something strange. The floor had a recent mark, as if it had been moved. Kneeling, I looked underneath and saw a metal box. It wasn't the one I had found days ago. This one was smaller, sealed with adhesive tape and covered with an old towel. For a moment, I thought about not touching it, but curiosity and fear mixed in such a way that I couldn't stop myself. I took it out carefully, put it on the bed, and cut the tape with scissors. Inside, there were 3 things: a notebook, a photograph, and a small jar with transparent liquid. I opened the notebook first. They were brief notes, some crossed out, others illegible. Dates, names, places. On one of the pages, I read a sentence that made me tremble. "The moment will arrive soon. She suspects nothing." I felt like I was running out of air. I looked at the box again with trembling hands. The photograph showed my husband and Roger together, like the others I had found, but on the back something was written. "The truth doesn't always save." And then I saw the jar. A small glass jar with a white label and a strong chemical smell that made my skin crawl. It didn't have a name, just a number. 117B. my mind filled with terrible images. Was it poison? Medicine? Part of some plan? I didn't know. I could only think of the words I had heard the night before. It has to disappear. I put everything away carefully. I put the box back in its place and left the room before he returned. I spent the rest of the day walking aimlessly around the house, trying to think clearly. At times, I told myself it was all a misunderstanding, that David couldn't hurt me, but then I remembered the paper, the key, the documents, the photos, and that jar, and my heart closed like a cold hand. At dinner time, when he arrived, I watched him closely. He seemed tired, yes, but also restless. He ate without looking at me, as if he feared what he might see in my eyes. "What's wrong, Mom?" he asked upon noticing my silence. "Nothing, son. I'm a little tired. You should rest. You're not well." "No, I'm not," I told him slowly, "but I'm better than you." He looked up. For an instant, our eyes met, and I saw something that chilled me. Fear. Not guilt, not anger. Fear. That night, I decided not to sleep. I waited for him to turn off the lights and listened for the sound of his bedroom door closing. Minutes later, a soft noise, his window opening. I approached the hallway again and saw him through the crack. David was putting something into a backpack with trembling hands, the jar, the notebook, and a white envelope. My breathing accelerated. Before he finished, I returned to my room and pretended to sleep. Shortly after, I heard him leave. I waited 10 minutes and followed him. The night was cold, almost moonless. I saw him walk down the deserted street until he stopped in front of a black car parked at the end of the block. Inside was a man. David handed him the envelope and the jar. The man nodded, opened the door, and they both spoke for a few seconds. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I saw something that tore me apart. The man gave my son an envelope full of money. David put it away quickly and walked off. I stood still, shivering, until he was out of sight. Then the car started and disappeared into the shadows. I returned home without feeling my legs. I turned on the hallway light, looked at myself in the mirror, and didn't recognize myself. My face was pale, my eyes sunken, my breathing ragged. Part of me still wanted to believe that my son had an explanation, but the other part, the one that had already seen too much, knew that was impossible. The next morning, before he woke up, I checked his backpack. The jar and the notebook weren't there, only the envelope of money, hidden under his clothes. They were new bills, in stacks, and a note on top. Done? No one suspects. I sat on the floor, holding the paper in my hands. I cried without tears, with my heart turned to stone. My whole life revolved around that boy, his well-being, his future, and now I found myself reading a sentence that discussed him like a stranger, or something worse. When he came down for breakfast, I pretended not to know anything. "Did you sleep well?" He told me. "I'm leaving early today." "Are you going to work?" "Yes, to work," he replied, avoiding my eyes. When he went out the door, I knew I couldn't stay still anymore. I took my phone and dialed the number I never thought I'd use again. Frank's, my husband's old friend, now a retired police officer. "Martha," he said upon recognizing my voice. "What's wrong?" "I need you to help me. I think my son is involved in something dangerous." There was a long silence on the other end. "I'm on my way. Don't touch anything." That night, before Frank arrived, I wrote in my notebook a sentence that still hurts to read. There are betrayals that don't kill the body, but they do kill the soul. And sometimes they come from the person you love the most. I closed the notebook with trembling hands and prepared myself to hear what he would tell me upon arrival. Although, deep down, I already knew. The truth was about to come to light. When Frank arrived that night, I hugged him without saying a word. I hadn't seen him since my husband's funeral. It had been almost 10 years. He had more gray hair, tired eyes, but the same firm voice as always. Upon entering, he scanned the living room with the look of someone used to reading spaces, to listening to what isn't said. "What's going on, Martha?" he asked. I told him everything. The paper, the key, the box, the photos, the jar, the money. As I spoke, I noticed how his expression shifted from bewilderment to concern. When I finished, he only said, "I need to see everything." I showed him the metal box and the papers. He examined them calmly, one by one. "This is serious," he murmured. "It doesn't look like an isolated incident." "What do you think is happening?" I asked, with my heart shrinking. "I don't know yet, but something tells me David isn't acting alone." That sentence hurt me, because deep down I wanted to believe that yes, that all this was a mistake, a confusion, that my son was still the noble boy who took care of me when I got sick, the one who made me tea in the early mornings. But every new detail pushed me toward a reality I didn't want to accept. The next day, Frank returned with his old investigator's briefcase. He brought a magnifying glass, gloves, and a notebook. "Don't touch anything," he told me. "Let's do this right." He analyzed the jar first. He smelled it, shook it carefully. "This isn't poison," he said after a few seconds. No, it's a chemical solvent used to erase ink or alter documents." I felt a chill. Documents? Yes. And judging by the amount missing, it must have been used to erase several complete pages. He then checked the papers in the envelope. They were old contracts from the company where my husband had worked before dying. They all had the same logo, Inverlex Corp., and at the bottom of each one, the signature of Roger, his brother. "This smells like fraud," Frank murmured. "Fraud?" "Yes, look at this. There are transfers to accounts that don't exist, fake names, and modified seals. And David? What does he have to do with this?" That is what we are going to find out. That night I waited up for David, but he didn't arrive. The clock struck 2 in the morning and the house was still silent. Every shadow seemed to watch me. Every creak of the floor made me turn my head. The fear was no longer just suspicion. It was a presence. Something was happening, and I felt it in my skin. When he finally arrived, near dawn, I saw him enter through the hallway window. He was dressed in black, with his shoes stained with mud. I hid behind the door and watched him. He put something in his backpack. He took off his jacket and went straight to the bathroom. In that instant, his phone vibrated on the dining room table. The screen lit up with a message. "Everything went well. She doesn't suspect. L." My body paralyzed. The same initial, the same woman, the same lie. In the morning, Frank checked the phone while David was still sleeping. "There is a hidden folder," he said. "I can access it, but I need time." I watched him move his fingers over the screen, like a surgeon disarming a bomb. When he managed to get in, his face changed. "Martha, you have to see this." He showed me a series of photos. They were screenshots of documents, receipts, and emails. Among them, a message sent by Roger, my husband's brother. "David, remember, your mother must know nothing, not now. When everything is ready, we will tell her it was for her own good." The air escaped my chest. "For my own good?" I murmured without understanding. Frank looked at me seriously. "It seems your son is involved in something that has to do with your husband, with his death, and with money. But for my own good? Maybe he's trying to protect you. Or maybe he thinks he is." I didn't know what to think. I sat down, my hands on the table, trembling. If all this was true, then my son wasn't a criminal, but just another piece in a game that began long before he understood it. That afternoon, Frank decided to follow him. I stayed home with the feeling that everything was going to crumble soon. Hours passed. At 9 at night, he called me. "Martha, I've got him," he said. "He's meeting with Roger." "Where?" "In an abandoned warehouse, on the way to the river." My heart started beating hard. "Don't get close," I asked him. "Please, don't do anything until I get there. Martha, I beg you." "Frank, I need to see it with my own eyes." I arrived at the place 20 minutes later. The warehouse was half ruined, the walls covered in graffiti and a smell of dampness in the air. I hid behind a column. Inside, I saw them. David and Uncle Roger, talking next to a table full of papers. Frank, hidden in the shadows, signaled me to keep quiet. "Everything is ready," Roger was saying. "We just need you to sign the document." "I can't do it," David replied, nervous. "She's going to find out." "She won't find out anything if you do what I told you." "She's my mother, Roger. I can't lie to her anymore." "Don't be naive," he shouted at him. "We're doing it for her, don't you understand? For her, right? If we don't sign, everything that belonged to your father will disappear. And you know she wouldn't survive another loss." My mind clouded over. I wanted to go out, scream, hug him, but Frank grabbed my arm. "Not yet," he whispered. "Let him speak." David took a deep breath. "If I find out you lied to me, I swear you'll pay for it," he said. "To me?" laughed Roger. "You're already in, boy. There is no turning back." Suddenly, a metallic noise sounded in the distance. Roger turned toward the door. "Did you hear that?" David shook his head. "You must go," his uncle told him. "We'll meet again tomorrow." When they left, I stayed there, shivering, with my head full of images. I didn't understand everything, but I already knew one thing. Roger was manipulating my son, and David was trapped. Later, at home, Frank confirmed it to me. "Your brother-in-law has been under investigation for years. Money laundering, forgery, fraud. And David? David probably got involved trying to clear your husband's name, but now he's in up to his neck." I felt a mixture of relief and pain. He wasn't a monster. He didn't want to hurt me. He was just trying to protect me and protect his father's memory. But he was doing it in the most dangerous way possible. Before sleeping, I stared at the metal box I still kept under the bed. Now everything made sense in a different way. The key, the paper, the jar, the photos. It was a puzzle that spoke of love, of fear, and of mistakes. I took my notebook and wrote. The truth never arrives complete. They always tear it into pieces, and each piece hurts as if it were the first. I turned off the light, and in the darkness, I understood that the worst hadn't happened yet, because half-truths always hide something bigger. That day dawned gray, and the sky seemed to foreshadow something. Frank called me early. His voice sounded graver than ever. "Martha, we have to talk, but not over the phone." We met at the corner diner, the same one where I used to have breakfast with my husband years ago. As soon as he saw me, he handed me a folder. "I found it," he told me. "This explains everything." The folder was full of copies, documents, emails, bank statements, and at the end, a handwritten letter in blue ink. The handwriting was David's. "If you are reading this, Mom, it is because you already know too much. Don't hate me. Everything I did was for Dad, for you." I discovered that his death wasn't an accident. It was Roger, and I only tried to prove it, even if it cost me everything. My eyes filled with tears. The diner became a distant noise. and the world a thick fog. Frank kept talking, but I could barely hear him. Your son was working with us, Martha, without you knowing. What? He was collaborating with an investigation to catch Roger. With you? Yes, but he should never have done it alone. At first, he gave us information. Then, when Roger started to suspect, David pretended to be on his side to gather bigger evidence. I covered my mouth with my hands. That's why he had the key. Exactly, Frank nodded. Number 17B is the warehouse where Roger kept the forged documents, and the jar was to erase ink from contracts, to replace them with new copies that would incriminate the uncle. I was left speechless. Everything I had interpreted as betrayal, lies, or malice was love. A clumsy, desperate love, but love nonetheless. My son had risked himself for me, to clear his father's name, and I had spied on him, doubted him, feared his shadow. I left the diner with the folder pressed against my chest. The cold wind brought me back to reality. I needed to see him, hug him, ask for his forgiveness. I walked home almost running, but when I arrived, the door was ajar. The silence inside was dense, unsettling. Something wasn't right. I entered cautiously. On the hallway floor, a fallen chair. On the table, the same papers I had seen before scattered, and next to them a short note, written with hurried strokes. They took him. My heart stopped. I ran up to his room, but he wasn't there. The bed unmade, the backpack open, the window ajar. Only the smell of his cologne remained, mixed with the smoke of a recently extinguished cigarette. I called Frank desperately. "He's not here!" I screamed. They took him. He took a few seconds to respond. "Calm down. I have him located. They intercepted him on the highway. Roger found out." "What?" "I'm on my way there now. Don't leave the house." But I couldn't stay still. I grabbed my coat, my keys, and went out to the street. The wind hit my face, but I kept walking, as if something inside me pushed me forward. I didn't feel my feet or the cold, only the urgency of a mother who doesn't think, who only acts. I found him before Frank did. The old warehouse by the river again. Roger's car was parked outside, the engine running. I hid behind a wall and heard voices from inside. My son's, weak. Roger's, hard, cruel. "I warned you, boy," he shouted. "I told you not to get involved. It's too late, Roger. Everything is in the hands of the police." "Oh yeah?" laughed the man. "Then you will die knowing that your mother will never know the truth." A blow. The dry sound of a body hitting the ground. My soul shattered. I ran in without thinking. "Stop!" I screamed. "Don't touch him!" Roger turned around, surprised. "Well, look at that, the Holy Mother," he said with sarcasm. "You arrived just in time to say goodbye." David was on the floor, bleeding from his eyebrow, with his hands tied. I tried to get closer, but Roger raised a gun. "Don't take a step, Martha." I looked him in the eyes, and in that instant, I understood that I wasn't afraid. Not of him, not of dying, only of not telling my son what I never told him, that I loved him more than my own life. "Do what you have to do," I told him. "But I swear that if you touch us, this time you won't save yourself." Roger smiled with contempt. "And what are you going to do, crazy old woman?" "This." I grabbed the jar that was on his table, the same type of jar David had used to erase ink, and threw it in his face. The liquid blinded him for seconds. David seized the moment. He jumped up and pushed him against the wall. The gun fell. I ran and kicked it away. In that instant, sirens broke the silence. Frank and the officers burst into the warehouse. Roger was screaming, covering his face, while my son, exhausted, collapsed at my feet. I hugged him, unable to hold back the tears. "Forgive me, son. I didn't know." He smiled weakly. "You have nothing to forgive, Mom. I did it for you." I felt his body tremble in my arms. The sound of the sirens, the voices, the chaos around. Everything disappeared. Only he and I remained, in the middle of the dust and noise, hugging like when he was a child. Frank approached, with a mixture of relief and sadness in his eyes. "It's over, Martha. It's all finished." But I knew it wasn't. That even though the truth had been revealed, nothing would ever be the same again. Before continuing, tell me here in the comments what you think of this story so far, and what you would do in her place. Don't leave the video, because what comes next will give you goosebumps. That night, while the police took Roger away in handcuffs, I watched the reflection of the blue lights on the river water and thought about everything that had happened. The paper, the key, the box, the doubt. Everything had had a purpose, and although the truth hurt, I could finally breathe. I took David's hand and squeezed it tight. "Promise me this ends here," I whispered. "I promise, Mom." But in his gaze, there was something else, a dark shine, a shadow, and I understood that the story hadn't ended yet. I thought that, after that night in the warehouse, we could finally breathe in peace. But peace is a fragile word. Sometimes it lasts only as long as it takes for silence to break. David was recovering slowly. The wounds on his face were healing, but the others, the ones you can't see, remained open. I spent the nights by his bed, watching him sleep. His breathing was calm, but his brow furrowed as if he were dreaming of something he couldn't let go of. Frank came every day to give us news. "Roger is cooperating," he said one morning. "He's telling everything he did." "And has he confessed about my husband yet?" I asked. "Yes, but there's something else, Martha. Something you should know." I looked at him in silence, with my heart shrinking. Frank lowered his voice. Roger didn't act alone. The words hit me like a dagger. "What do you mean?" "There was someone else involved, someone who knew your husband's movements, who passed information to Roger before the accident." "Who?" I whispered, barely breathing. "I don't know yet, but Roger mentioned it in his statement. He said that she knew everything. She..." That word pierced my chest. She? Who was she? That night, David came down for dinner. I saw him calmer, but with a distant look. Frank told me that Roger spoke. He said without looking at me, "Yeah? And what else did he tell you?" "That there was someone else, a woman." He looked up. For a second, his face tensed. Then he dissimulated. "I don't know who it could be," he said, lowering his eyes. But his voice trembled. I noticed it. And something inside me broke again. Days passed. Roger kept testifying, but his condition worsened. One afternoon, Frank called me. "Martha, you have to come. Roger asked to see you." The simple sound of his name turned my stomach. I didn't want to do it, but I needed to hear his truth. I went to the hospital accompanied by Frank. Roger was haggard, with tubes and bandages. Upon seeing me, he smiled with a weak grimace. "Martha, you were always so naive." "Say it at once," I demanded. "Who else was with you?" "It wasn't my idea," he murmured. "I just followed orders." "Orders from whom?" "From someone you love more than anyone." I felt my heart beating in my ears. "Who are you talking about?" I repeated. Roger barely smiled. "From David." My world collapsed. You're lying, I screamed. That is a lie. Believe it or not, he knew everything. The money, the papers, the accident. No. Your son started with me. What he didn't calculate was that he would outgrow me. Frank stopped him. Enough. There is no proof of that. There is, said Roger with a malignant glint in his eyes, in the safe at the warehouse. 17B. I felt the ground move beneath me. I didn't know whether to cry or scream. Roger leaned back and closed his eyes, satisfied. On his dying face was a twisted smile. Back at home, I didn't speak to David. I watched him from the hallway while he watched television as if nothing had happened. But in his gaze, there was a tiredness I didn't understand, a shadow that wasn't there before. The next morning, when he went out to buy bread, I searched his backpack. Inside, I found a small key, different from the others. It hung from a keychain with the initials F. Roger Fernandez. My heart skipped a beat. It was the key to the warehouse, the same one from number 17B. I went there at dusk, alone. The same damp building, the same smell of rust. The padlock yielded easily. I turned on the flashlight and advanced among boxes and filing cabinets until I found it. A safe embedded in the wall. The key fit perfectly. Inside there were folders, hard drives, and envelopes with money. And among them, a letter, folded carefully. My name written on the cover, for Mom. I opened it with trembling hands. Mom, if you are reading this, it is because you already know everything. I am not innocent. At first, I just wanted to know the truth, but I let myself get dragged in. Roger offered me money to keep me quiet. I accepted. I thought that way I would protect you. But there is no justification for what I did. Forgive me, Mom. If I could go back, I would have never touched that money. I would have never lied. I would have never been an accomplice to his death. I froze. Every word was a direct blow to the soul. He hadn't just wanted to protect me. He had also lied, hidden, participated. I left the warehouse trembling. The wind blew hard. Night was falling. I cried in silence with the letter pressed against my chest. I no longer knew whether to hate him or hug him, whether to scream at him or protect him once more. When I arrived home, he was waiting for me, standing in the living room, with red eyes and a pale face. You went to the warehouse, didn't you? He asked bluntly. I didn't answer. I just held up the letter. He nodded in silence. Roger wasn't lying. Why, David? I whispered. Why did you do this to me? Because I didn't want to lose you, he said with tears in his eyes. If I told you the truth, you would have hated me. And if I didn't, at least I could save you. I looked at him for a long time. He was my son, the same one who hugged me when he was afraid of the dark. But he was also the man who had betrayed his own father. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said finally. I'm not asking you to, he whispered. I just want you to live. Before continuing, tell me here in the comments what you think of this story so far and what you would do in her place. Don't leave the video, because what comes next will give you goosebumps. That night, I slept little. When I woke up, David was no longer there. On the dining room table, he left his ring, his watch, and a short note. I love you. Don't look for me. And then I knew that the story hadn't ended yet, that sometimes love and guilt are the same thing, just seen from different sides of the mirror. 3 months have passed since David left, 3 months of a house that sounds hollow, where every echo carries his name. At first, I expected to hear the sound of his footsteps on the stairs, his voice calling me from the door, the jingle of his keys on the table. But time taught me that there are absences that make no noise, only a void that never stops breathing. Frank visits me every now and then. Sometimes he brings flowers, other times just silence. We both avoid talking about David, as if pronouncing his name were a form of invoking him. But every look of his tells me without words. They haven't found him yet. The police believe he crossed the border, that he used Roger's contacts to disappear. They say maybe he's alive, that he just needs time to rebuild his life. But a mother doesn't believe in hypotheses. She feels, and I feel that he is still alive, that he breathes somewhere, with guilt beating inside him like a clock that doesn't stop. I have spent my days organizing what remained, throwing away the unnecessary, keeping what weighs. In the back of a drawer, I found the gray jacket, the one where it all started. I washed it one more time, carefully. In the inside pocket, the mended lining was still there. I put my hand inside, out of curiosity, and felt something, a folded sheet. It was a note, written in his handwriting. If one day you read this, Mom, I want you to know that everything started for you. I couldn't bear for the lie to stain your name or Dad's. I didn't want to hurt you, but silence seemed less cruel than the truth. I love you, David. Tears blurred my vision. I sat on the bed and let the paper soak in my hands. It was as if time had made a perfect circle. The same pocket. Another message. Different pain. Since then, every night I light a candle in the window. A small flame, but constant. I let it burn until the wax goes out on its own, as if it were my way of telling him that I am waiting for him here, without resentment. Because I have no hate left, nor rage. Only a gentle sadness, like the sea when it has already returned all the bodies. I have learned that forgiveness doesn't always mean justifying. Sometimes it is just accepting that you can't change what is already broken, and that loving also implies letting go. The other day, Frank brought me a box. "It's David's," he said. He left it in my office before leaving. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside there were photos of us. My wedding, his childhood, a drawing he made for me when he was a boy, and a black notebook. On the first page he wrote, "For Mom, the bravest woman I ever knew. If I don't come back, I want you to use this to help others. Let no one else lose their family for a lie." Between the pages, there were notes, dates, contacts. It was information about Roger's associates, about other victims. Everything David had discovered before disappearing. I understood then that his flight wasn't cowardice. It was his way of continuing what he started, of seeking redemption in his own way. Today, the house no longer scares me. I have filled the walls with new photographs, women from the neighborhood, mothers who also lost something. I give them tea. I listen to them. I hug them. Sometimes we laugh. Sometimes we cry. Among us all, we have made loneliness a refuge. I talk to them about David, about what he did, about what I learned, and I always end up telling them the same thing. A mother's love is not measured by what she endures, but by what she forgives. A few nights ago, while I was watering the plants, I saw something at the gate. A still figure, among the shadows. For a second, I thought it was my imagination. But when I took a step, that figure moved. It was a man. He was wearing a cap and a gray jacket. I couldn't see his face, but his posture, his hands, his way of looking were unmistakable. I felt my soul jump into my chest. "David?" I whispered. He didn't answer. He just put a finger to his lips, asking for silence. Then, with a slow gesture, he pointed to the candle lit in the window and disappeared into the darkness. I stayed there, motionless, with my heart beating like when I was young. I didn't know if it was real or a dream. But that night, the candle burned longer than ever, and at dawn, on the windowsill, I found a folded paper. It had only 4 words: "I am at peace." And that was my story. The story of a mother who confused fear with betrayal and discovered too late that love sometimes hurts more when it is sincere. Today, when night falls and silence takes ownership of the house, I close my eyes, breathe, and speak to the darkness. If you ever come back, son, I won't bring reproaches. Only hot coffee and a chair waiting for you in front of the window. Because a mother's love does not die with distance. It only learns to live with the echo of steps it no longer hears. Tell me in the comments which city you are listening to me from. If this story moved you, give it a like and subscribe to the channel to keep following stories like mine. Of mothers, of children, and of secrets that the heart never forgets.